Okay, we are live. Welcome to
We are
episode
live.
1 of Gender Heretics. And sorry for the crappy music.
Yeah, we gotta figure out some actual music.
Yeah, we do.
But
Also, I made a mess of that as well. Like, you'll hear it when you go back and listen to the stream.
Can't wait.
Alright, so who's with us today? Intros.
Well, I guess I will start, since we weren't prepped for that. I am Erin. I own and started the page, well, it currently loathes some lesbians as despicable dykes, back in the spring, and I am a, uh, excuse me, I am a dysphoric butch lesbian. So that's kind of my lane for the left book people listening.
You're a little bit epic there, Mr. Butch Lesbian. You're a little bit echoey. Sorry.
Okay,
Epic and echoey.
I'll see what I can do.
I am Kaylee, the token puppet, and
What kind of puppet?
oh well, my illustrious lanes in the land of left book are being a transsexual male to female, and I guess I'm a lesbian. I don't know. I'm not a lesbian. I don't know.
Dating within lesbian circles.
Yes.
Oof, that sounded bad.
Yeah, I know, right?
Okay, so Kaylee is married to me, and we just established what my lanes are, and I am a lesbian. I experience no genuine attraction at all to men. I'm not a political lesbian, and that's something we'll be covering a little bit later, but just to explain that horrible foot and mouth moment we just had.
I'm
Yep.
wonderful at foot and mouth moments, as I'm
So-
sure everybody will learn.
So, Erin, you're the horrible turf who
Yes.
is manipulating Kaylee and using her as a puppet.
Hey, that's not entirely true. You're manipulating me and propping me up as a tool as well.
That's
Remember?
true. That's true. So, good segue into my introduction. I'm obviously Nyx from Sapphic Sims, and clearly I'm also, yes, I'm the other master manipulator of poor, defenseless, unthinking Kaylee.
They keep me locked in a tower, even.
Yeah, we bring her out when we need to lane people, basically, and then we promptly put her
Like
back
a
away.
pet dog.
Yeah, right, Kaylee. Yep.
Yes. So abused. Oh, I didn't know you were gonna be so funny. I wouldn't have taken that bong hit.
All right, so do we want to move on? Is there anything we've missed about? Oh, what are your lanes, Nix?
My lanes. God, what does that even mean? Okay, well, I guess I
Like
should.
a summary of your
My-
identity.
my social
even though we're
identity
not
is right.
calling it- Yes.
Yeah. So
I hope everybody heard those scare quotes.
So, my social identity. I'm white. Let's just get that very, very clear because people seem to. There was confusion about that for a while. I'm white. I'm extremely white. I'm just outrageously white. I'm basically made of mayonnaise. And I am bisexual, and I am a desisted female. So I identified as trans for the last 10 years. Originally as a trans guy, then non-binary for several years, and I have recently dropped the trans label. I am still a dysphoric person, and yeah, I feel like that's all that really matters. That's all that's really relevant to this right now. So, yeah, those are my lanes, which are basically none. Yeah, I got no clout in the liberal hierarchy. So.
Yeah, that's me. I have all the clout.
Yeah.
But since
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I'm a
mean-
lowly puppet, they have actually stripped me of all my
I
clout.
don't know,
It's very
Nix.
disappointing.
You actually have more clout than I do because you are bi, whereas I am a lesbian and left book.
Monosexual privilege.
Yeah. Assign
True.
me privilege for that.
That's true.
Monosexual, as if I'm not obviously.
Also, he's essentially a man.
Yep, that's true.
As I
Definitely
feel like
a
we've
man.
repeatedly established.
Oh yeah, because
somehow.
we all know that
But we're gonna cover that
masculine.
later.
Yeah, like masculine
We're gonna
women
cover
are
that later in our
indistinguishable from men,
drama.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because that is actually a really common, reoccurring theme in all of what we're going to talk about today.
Yep. So we also haven't actually decided on, how much time we're going to be streaming for, but I sort of figure that we have plenty of time. We can just keep going as long as we want, pretty much.
Yeah, we don't have lives, so it's really however long we decide we want to rant at you.
Yep. Cool. I think because of Erin's monosexual privilege, though, I feel like Erin should speak maybe 20% less than me, and because of our cis privilege, that we should maybe speak approximately 50% less than you, Kaylee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And also, since I am the owner of the illustrious penis, everything I say is actually true, whereas you're just like submitting hypotheses until I verify that.
Yeah. I mean, everything
the
we
lowly
say is
females
suspect
are
until
allowed
you.
to actually think.
Yeah. Sounds reasonable.
Y'all, our marriage is not actually like this.
Our friendship
I
is
feel like
definitely actually like this.
I mean, it blows my mind that people assume that I have so little autonomy. I am frankly insulted. Like, how spineless do these assholes think I am? I'm not my dad. Jesus.
Getting real personal real fast here. It is really interesting, though, to sit and watch them make these claims as though, like, because what they're doing is they're literally saying, hey, all these things we know about your relationship that we know to be true, we're actually going to say that it's all been this elaborate plot to further some sort of turf agenda. And, like, that's to think that we have that kind of commitment and that kind of we're scheming like that kind of says a lot
Right,
about the people assuming it.
I have so much executive dysfunction that, like, even if we thought of this plan, I wouldn't have done anything.
Oh God, yeah, we couldn't have done that. But
Yeah.
no, it's very.
I didn't move 2,000 miles across the country.
How unhappy are you with yourself? How much do you not like yourself to put yourself in that? To imagine that anybody would live like that, would live 24/7, move 2,000 miles across the country to live with someone just to be a prop, or you think I literally kidnapped her and I'm some sort of
literal
weird
fucking monster?
Hannibal Lecter psychopath.
Oh, Erin, I think you really underestimate the appeal of delicious cis boot.
Yeah.
Kaylee.
All right, so anyway.
Yes.
No, go on. We have an agenda.
I was going to say maybe I should talk about what we were going to do today.
Were we actually going to try to stay on track? That's
yes.
odd. Okay.
No, so we want to just give everybody a rundown and kind of a response to the drama that happened that got us to the point where we are now, where we've just created Gender Heretics.
And, like, really just get all this out of the way, because if people do decide to start asking all of these questions, we don't want to spread all of this nonsense out over like chunks of multiple episodes.
Yeah,
Like,
this is where all of your drama related stuff and how we got to the gender heretics point.
until something hilarious happens
Yeah,
to us
just
again, and then we get to make fun of the people that are hate listening to us now.
Well, you've got that talking 50% more thing down.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
right? I can't seem to shut up.
expert.
Yeah,
It's
so
almost like she's been gagging for a platform, right, where she's not going to get accused of being, a mindless puppet and, have misogynistic abuse hurled at her.
right.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
So, yeah, I thought we would go through everything that's happened in a roughly chronological way because we could talk about everything like neatly and sorted by topics, but I just don't think it would be as interesting, and I know the drama is kind of fun, and I just got asked actually right before we came on air for a summary of the drama, and I can't give that, but that tells me that people at least want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
So, the first thing that happened, really, that was the beginning of all this. Well, I guess I should say, when I created I should say when Kaylee and I created the Despicable Dykes page, the predecessor to Loathsome Lesbians, we actually did so actually over a year ago originally, when we were sitting in the bathtub upset about some argument we'd been in on the internet in which I had been told I was a horrible TERF. I was abusive towards Kaylee for some little thing that I said about sex and gender and attraction. And at that point, we were trying very carefully to not make waves. So whatever I would have said is incredibly minor. And we made a joke about how we should just create a page to address these people. And as we were talking about it and talking about the general disdain in some of these communities for lesbians, and also their tendency to just label people as completely horrible and written off entirely, we decided to make it Despicable Dykes. And we ran that page and then Loathsome Lesbians after it for months while being really careful not to be turfy or get labeled turfs until I screwed up a little bit and I overestimated the culture of left book, and I made a post that I thought they were ready for and they were not, and that was talking about FTM people and lesbians interdating. There was a lot of drama at the time talking about how if a woman is a lesbian and is in a relationship with somebody who comes out as a trans man, then that means that the lesbian is now bi, and all of the drama surrounding that, and the lack of compassion over either not either continuing to call yourself a lesbian or refusing to leave your partner who you may have been with for 20 years. And so I made a post talking about, from a high level, the history of transitioning butches, which we acknowledge are butches, and the lesbians that dated them, and then talking about the material reality between someone who identifies as a trans man versus someone who is a transitioning lesbian. And if the material reality is the same, dating one over another doesn't require a different sexual orientation. And I also talked a little bit about the border wars between trans men and butches who are dysphoric and transitioning, and the history of that and how it's always been, and there have always been people who feel and conceptualize themselves as both trans men and lesbians, or as both FTM people and lesbians. And so that went to shit
Quickly.
Yep, I
Nix
remember.
wasn't really that involved in it because
Safety.
Kaylee and I came out as TERFs first, I guess, in those circles. Anyway, that was the beginning of the end. We were canceled. I did address it in a pinned post that ended up making it worse because in that pinned post, I went ahead and defined lesbian in trying to make it clear why I'd made the previous post as female homosexual and explained that for that reason, a transitioning FTM person is still female. You can't actually change your sex. So if a transitioning FTM person acknowledges themselves as female and they are attracted only to other females, then they are a female homosexual. And I talked in that about people being male and female bodied,
Yeah,
as far
because I mean,
as people who are
kind of.
agender or NB, and like you don't have an agender body, that doesn't
Yeah.
exist.
No, and it's
Like-
kind of it's a bit bizarre that it seems to be such a radical notion that, you know,
Well,
biological
I guess-
sex might have something to do with sexual orientation.
This is kind of one of the places, though, we should talk about language, because they're saying I have an agender body, but your body does not have a gender.
No.
So
Your
I
body-
guess
gender
that
does
is
not
technically
apply.
true.
Yeah, because gender doesn't apply to your body. Your body is not gendered. Yes, we gender parts. We do that because very recently sex and gender were the same thing, and now transgenderism requires there be a split, but we are talking about sex when we say a male or female body. We are not talking about your gender. Like, that is
Yeah.
your sexual characteristics.
It's
That are
we're not talking
immutable.
about like the nuances of your personality, which is really all a gender is, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's also like I was talking specifically about non-transitioning people as well. So it's not even complicated at that point by what hormones can do to your body. At that point, we're literally talking about non-transitioning male and female people who don't identify as male or female, who have not taken cross-sex hormones, who are trying to say they don't have male and female bodies. And anyway, that was the end of that, and I lost a lot of followers. I ran the page for a little while after. Then we had some personal stuff happen. I was kind of bored with the page, so I deactivated it and kind of stepped off the scene.
Yep.
And then
Also,
Nick decided to blow up the world.
It should be noted, though, that that was the least serious cancellation. Throughout that happening, I did get called a TERF, but people treated me like a poor, misguided, dysphoric female. I didn't get really death threats, or rape threats, or, you know, all of this stuff that we've gotten since that we'll talk about. A couple people called me a man during that, but that was really pretty isolated. You know, there were those self-thing
And they were
trans man
really
comments.
laughable comments.
Well, no, that's not true. They were either laughable or they were people who genuinely believed it and were trying to be sincere. And while that is ridiculous, and please don't do that to me when I'm literally
Or
sitting here
literally
telling
anybody.
you that that's not true. Yeah, you don't argue someone's identity with them when they tell you that they don't have one. That's completely bizarre. But
Yeah, and like
that was really just like, this didn't get the attention of the TRAs. This was
not yet.
was contained largely within a circle of the internet. But it's important to note, because if that hadn't happened, and if Loathsome Lesbians and Sapphic Sims hadn't both come out of that very small circle of Left Book, we would not have caught the attention of the TRAs in the same way that we did, because it was ultimately Left Book that turned them on to us.
Yeah. Yeah, we that was essentially it. Interestingly, like, we were not particularly friends, or, you know, had any one-on-one communication until after that cancellation.
Yep.
And it was
a couple months after, I feel like, too, like maybe 6 weeks.
Yeah, it was definitely at least a few weeks afterwards, like probably at least a month afterwards, because I was, I was completely stunned by what I was seeing because I hadn't been super active in the online community before I made Sapphic Sims. And then, I found myself in this, online social circle of meme page admins and stuff. And everything seemed kind of normal. I was a bit older than quite a few people. Like, obviously, I'm around 30. I'm not going to be specific, but I'm around 30, the pointy end. And there are a lot of younger people and stuff. So I felt a little bit out of place and everything. And you were some of the people who are more in my age group and everything. But everything seemed normal until you made that post. And then everything that unfolded afterwards and the way that people reacted to it, was so stunning to me. Even though I didn't at the time fully agree with where you were coming from, I found value in some of the things that you said in that post. And, outside of the internet in normal everyday adult land, that's actually pretty normal to, take the good, leave the bad, get on with it. But the way that it opened up this massive, chasm, and I mean, that's nothing compared to what happened later, obviously, like you said, was just so shocking to me. And it took a little while. I sort of complied. But then after a little while, I didn't like the kind of behavior that I was seeing. It's not how I do things. It's not how I've ever done things. It's just not how things work in, real life adult land. And eventually I thought, screw it.
Your eyes are opened.
Yeah. And, what I saw was a real pattern of instability in relationships as well. That's not a way to create sustainable relationships or to build any actual kind of material, substantial community. It's all very superficial. And then ultimately I ended up deciding to message you to, I don't know, open up the communication, and then here
Blow
we
off
are.
some steam, really. I feel like what we were all trying to do initially.
Well, yeah, I mean, I also wanted to apologize because I felt like I'd been really cowardly and just quietly sitting by while that stuff was happening. Even though I didn't at the time fully agree with the posts that you got cancelled over, I disagreed with the way you were treated even more. And I didn't say anything.
I could tell that you were reaching out largely because you had this, oh crap, I was on the wrong side.
I was, yeah.
And, I get it. If this goes wide enough in Left Book, there will be some people listening who will remember what Kaylee and I were like 18 months ago. And
oh God, we were awful.
If anybody remembers the group, I literally require this to be a satire run by Catalina. We were very, I can say that, she's famous. We were very much her pets for several months. And it was
goading people into saying something that the groupthink had deemed problematic. And more than anything, that was always a game.
Yeah, we are, like Nick said, we are quite a bit older than most of these people. It wasn't as bad back then, it trended a little bit older, but a lot of the people in these things are at a very different stage of life than we are.
Yeah.
Kaylee is...
I don't know even...
if you care.
I don't even remember how old I am. How old am I now?
You're 33.
Oof.
So Kaylee is quite a bit older than most of these people, and I'm older than quite a few of them, but I am 26, and I graduated college with a bachelor's degree at 19. I was married at 18, so I am at a very, very different stage of life as these people who are maybe only 2 years younger than I am, some of them my age, but I'm a lot more removed from that, so...
Yeah, you weren't afforded an adolescent in a traditional sense.
Yeah, so that drama didn't really, it was fun, it was a game, and I honestly, it took me a long time to realize that they were actually honestly being real about this. This wasn't just...
a game for everybody.
Everybody trolling in a group, because for a long time I thought it was almost entirely trolling, and yeah, So we were awful back then, and if anybody remembers us from that, every now and then we get someone come up and be like, "Hey, you yelled at us." And sorry, I promise you, we don't believe anything that we were arguing back then.
Yeah.
Oof, a lot of it had to do with internalized guilt for me, because I know that I really got into the genital preference argument and
Yeah.
arguing that, genital preferences are transphobic, and that's because I have a lot of trauma that creates a visceral, like,
Well, I'm glad
it's
you
beyond
brought.
an aversion to male genitalia.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that segues into the reason you felt guilty is because you were being gaslighted into believing that that was wrong, and that you were stripping the humanity from fellow trans women.
And also, it was just me being self-loathing, because I'm supposed to accept that and, like, it's okay, we're all perfect how we are. It's like, no, I have intense severe dysphoria because I have been incredibly traumatized in my life. And, like, it's just like stacking trauma and the lack of addressing that created a person that literally had to transition or die.
Yep. But yeah, and I also, like, hey, spoiler alert, I'm a lesbian. That means I have a genital preference. So while my genital preference is very complicated because I have a very different type of trauma, there is still that guilt when you have this culture that is telling you,
And
hey,
also a partner.
if you have genital preference, you are bad, you are wrong, you're not allowed to have that. And as a female person, especially, who has been societally conditioned to accept male genitalia, and that's just without even talking about what else female socialization does to you. That's really hard to get beyond. So that was we weren't going to talk about the driving force behind why we were awful TRAs once, but I guess that's really relevant here.
Yeah, it is.
And now,
Yeah.
And you used the word earlier. You made a comment about coming out as a TERF, which may have been tongue in cheek. I sort of feel like once you're on this side of the fence and you actually understand what that acronym does, that those comments are always going to be tongue in cheek, but
it's not. TERFs aren't real.
Not the archetype of the TERF that the community treats like a stalking boogeyman. But yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because at the time when you talk about coming out as a TERF, I mean, literally all you were saying was that no, it's not unreasonable or transphobic or weird for a lesbian to be attracted to a trans man, and the idea that makes you a TERF is, that is wild to me. Like that has anything to do with exclusionary politics or trying to attack trans rights or anything like that. It's just wildly liberal use of that term to the point that it doesn't mean anything.
And in those extreme TRA spaces, especially the cis allies, that's how they run things. You're a TERF if you say anything that triggers anybody's dysphoria. So all those things, saying female or male bodied, that triggers people's
Acknowledging
dysphoria.
reality triggers dysphoria, because dysphoria is an irrational reaction. It is an irrational compulsion. It's not the world's fault that you're not okay. And it's okay to not be okay, but you can't expect the world to completely change because you're not okay.
Ultimately you have to live in a society, and
get a little
nobody with any other issue gets to literally demand And they try on Left Book with trigger warnings, but nobody gets to literally demand. I am terrified of spiders. I can't spider. I can't do it. I literally have almost wrecked my vehicle multiple times when there is the tiniest spider in it.
He
But
killed a spider yesterday, and I am so proud.
Okay, it was literally like the size of the head of a pin. I couldn't actually
I
tell
don't-
it was a spider until my eyeball was 2 inches from it. But those don't actually scare me because they don't count as spiders. But anyway, I don't get to demand, I don't get to expect that if I'm in, say, a friend's house and they don't believe in killing spiders or they trap and release spiders, those people are really committed. Because even I think it makes more sense to just let the spider live in the house than to trap and release it. But I don't get to demand in my friend's house that they kill the spider that lives in the corner of their living room because I am afraid of spiders. That's my problem. That's not their problem, and I need to figure out how to manage that. And if it was a large enough spider, if they had like a free range tarantula, it would mean I couldn't go to their house. But that's on me. That's not on them.
Yeah, I think there's like a real misplacing of, responsibility
If
and
you are
obligation.
afraid of dogs, you can't expect people not to have dogs.
Yes.
Yeah, and also this is a really, we've come back to this just in general really often as well, that the fact that, dysphoria is very, very real, and all of us here know that because we all have it or have had it.
Yes.
It's very real. It's very uncomfortable, and it can be really distressing. But there are a lot of issues that a person can have that can be very uncomfortable and distressing. And it's really important, whether we're talking about dysphoria or whether we're talking about, any other kind of, like we're talking about trauma, or, the things that certain personality disorders can do to you and your self-image and stuff. Those things can be really painful. It's really important to remember that just because something makes you uncomfortable or upsets you or distresses you doesn't necessarily mean that it's incorrect. And I think that something that's happened in the community is that dysphoria has become, like, avoiding triggering dysphoria has become this real driving force behind the politics. And that's not necessarily a reasonable way to operate, because it brings us to some really irrational positions, like the situation we're in where we're insisting that biological sex is not a real thing. That's ultimately coming from the fact that acknowledging sex differences triggers dysphoria for people who have dysphoria. And I understand that, but that doesn't mean that it's incorrect, and doesn't mean we have to do away with the notion of biological sex. It means we need to be able to clearly identify when it's our dysphoria talking and not actually our brains.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and like, since I have started to like acknowledge the roots of my dysphoria and all of this, and it's not like I'm gonna detransition, but it's been alleviated so much by understanding it and, completely eschewing the popular notion that, like,
You were born that way.
that I was born this way and that this is a natural thing to happen to me, because there is nothing good or okay or natural about living a life with sex dysphoria. It's wretched. I don't know why anybody would ever want this. And if I don't know.
That doesn't make it any less real, I think, is the point here.
Mhm.
Like, we're acknowledging that this exists. PTSD is a trauma response, but it is still very real, and you will still deal with it for the rest of your life. And like, we acknowledge that. People don't argue about the existence of PTSD on this side of the aisle. Like we recognize that that's just science and that is just a thing. We're not alt-righters over here. So it doesn't matter what dysphoria is caused by. And honestly, it's irrelevant to this anyway because most of
And it
what
absolutely should be treated.
yeah, and most of what we're talking about is politics. Like we don't really this doesn't exist. Gender heretics didn't get made to talk about the ethics or the causes of dysphoria and transitioning from like an interpersonal level. Like really like we haven't been called TERFs because of that. We have been called TERFs because of purely political opinions and how we prioritize females as a group of people oppressed on the basis of sex, and that we do not buy the notion that trans women are this hugely oppressed group, and like that's all political. That doesn't it doesn't matter if you agree or disagree with us on causes of dysphoria or whether or not someone should transition. Like I feel like it's important to be clear because both sides of the aisle in this really narrow gender crit discussion may disagree with us there, but it doesn't matter. We're mostly here to talk about politics and reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why are you here next?
Oh, why am I here? Well, first of all,
Yeah, how did you break the world? We're gonna finally get to that.
Yeah, because right now, in our chronological touching on this drama thing, you'll remember that Loathsome Lesbians is out of the picture. I unpublished it.
that's
We
right.
got a little sidetracked there. That's where we left it. We are off the scene. At this point, we've been banned from most groups. Oh, the worst drama that did happen about that though. Back then I was I was claiming the label trans mask, and I was really focused on that because if I focused on that, I didn't have to focus on being female the same way. Like I could acknowledge my femaleness, but it wasn't the whole story. Anyway, I'm not there anymore, but there was a person who claims to be a trans woman that runs in those circles that actually published a public post with my full name. This is why everybody knows who we are. This is why we're not using with my full name and the fact that I trans mask. They might have called me a self-loathing trans man. Actually, I'm pretty sure they did.
Yeah, that boy did.
But yeah, that was the worst of it. So the TRAs at that point attempted to out me because I said, "Hey, y'all, nobody knows this. Like, you're putting this in a public post. My family could see this. My friends could see this. This is not a thing I want out there, and I'm not worried about anything as far as like it wouldn't matter if anybody found out. But that still was not something I wanted out there. In part because I wasn't completely sold on this identity shit anyway. But yeah, so that was the worst that came of that. That's why we're here with our real names. Thanks to it's obviously not doxing, but thanks to some TRA figuring out who ran our page and publishing that. And I will say that the post eventually got taken down by everybody, which was great, but also it didn't really matter. But damage was done. Everybody in these circles know who Kaylee and I are. Both of you know his name. It's whatever. Yeah. So that's why we are the only people who are involved with this who are.
I mean, yeah, they know our last name. It's getting censored for a little bit there.
Yeah, it's true. They censored our last name. So yeah, Sapphic Sims. What did Sapphic Sims do?
What'd you do, Nick?
What did Next do? All right, first off, Erin, you're super duper echoey. Just a heads up. We're gonna have to fix that for next week if we can. Actually, yeah, that's better.
Okay.
What did Nix do? So, yeah, you had unpublished Loathsome Lesbians at that point, and I had started covering the Jessica Yaniv debacle. And so this a few things were happening at the same time, and this was just a bad time for all these things to be happening. But what had happened was I had gotten really frustrated with the, like I said, wildly liberal use of the TERF acronym, and the inaccurate use of it and everything. And I had decided that I was going to do a series of posts. I was going to make an effort to actually go and read the position of so-called TERFs, who think of themselves as simply being feminists, or often known as radical feminists or gender-critical feminists. They don't call themselves TERFs. And I thought I would go and I would read what they had to say, and that I would do a series of posts refuting their arguments, basically. And what ended up happening was I'd been going through this kind of, it's funny because they tell you don't even look at TERF arguments because you'll become one of them. Like, well, that's kind of telling, isn't it? The fact that it makes so much sense. But I had also been going through this issue of, trying to figure out my own identity, because I identified as trans for the last 10 years. And fortunately never medically transitioned, which I'm really happy about now. I'm glad that I didn't. But I had been questioning things for quite a while, like before any of this drama even started. And, I'd trying to figure out the differences between, being agender and pangender. And, the fact that I didn't feel like I had a gender identity. I didn't feel like I had a gender. And, some people said to me that, oh, well then, that is a type of trans, that's agender. Which didn't make sense to me, because I was like, yeah, but all of the so-called cis people that I know, they feel the same. Like, they're not walking around with a gender identity. They just don't feel any mismatch between how they feel inside and what their body is like. It's the absence of dysphoria, but also they don't have a gender identity. So what exactly is the difference between me and them? Am I just cis? Is cis even a meaningful term, actually?
Oh God, I hate cis.
Yeah, it's same, and like this, it's just
not.
it's a false dichotomy.
It's so
I hate
weird
it.
to hear you say it.
It is. We don't even use it anymore.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't, and it didn't make. That's why I couldn't get answers to those questions, because
don't need a special word to refer to 99% of the population.
Well, there is that. Like, it's not. I don't think it's super practical in that sense. But the biggest
the problem.
Yeah, the biggest objection that I have to it was the idea that cis means that you identify with your assigned gender at birth, and like, just that whole statement was becoming increasingly incoherent to me, because I was sort of going, I wasn't assigned a gender at birth, though. Like, obviously, in our social circle, we don't all necessarily agree on this concept of assigned gender at birth. But the way I feel about it is that I wasn't assigned a gender at birth. My primary sex characteristics, which is my genitals, were observed and they were recorded. And we have, we're a sexually dimorphic species. And we have words that describe the sexes, and the English word that describes my sex was female, and that's what was recorded.
And like, that's not unique to humans, and I think we need to acknowledge the part where we're animals and
mammals.
Like,
I mean, that's mammals. You have males and females.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's just how reproduction works in our species, as well as many other species. So I wasn't assigned a gender. No one assigned me a gender identity. They just observed and recorded my sex, and society then imposed a whole bunch of sex stereotypes and roles on me as a result of that, and they're very oppressive, and it's pretty understandable that the average person would not enjoy them very much. And so the idea of identifying with my assigned gender at birth didn't make any sense for a start, because I wasn't assigned a gender at birth, but also the idea that I had some internal sense of being female that was somehow separate from literally just physically being biologically female, and that I proactively identified with it. That stopped making sense to me. I didn't know what that meant, because I was like, does that mean that I identify with my genitals? Because I don't know what it means to identify with my vagina. I don't know what that means. Does it mean I identify with, like the sex stereotypes about female people? Well, I really don't know any female people who do identify with sex stereotypes at all. Like, that's how I ended up identifying as trans to begin with, was that I didn't identify with those sex stereotypes. So the concept of, the cis trans thing seemed like a really false dichotomy to me. The idea that, like, trans is an appropriate word to refer to people who, are transitioning their sex characteristics. I know Kaylee prefers the word transsexual, because gender is not really a meaningful word in that regard. So transsexual makes more sense.
Nope.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But cis is not really a meaningful word, especially when we're talking about biologically female people. It becomes kind of insulting to suggest that we can, we can identify with female sex stereotypes. That's actually pretty insulting.
Oh, it's incredibly insulting.
Yeah, I don't
Like,
identify with my oppression.
Really?
Yes.
No?
Yeah, I don't identify with my
Weird.
oppression. That seems crazy, right?
It does.
But so
like,
I mean,
what else are we? What are you saying to me? That's so rude. How can? That is why they call me a fucking man.
Yeah, exactly.
Listen, that's why y'all are looking at a fucking butch dyke and insisting over and over again that I am a man. Because if I don't say that I identify with your idea of being female and thus qualify as cis, then I'm a man, and that's really shitty and really homophobic.
Yeah, it is. And like what's being said there is that, the idea that you identify, that being cis means identifying with femininity. Well, that means that very few female people would actually be considered to be cis women. It means that no lesbian, and definitely no butch lesbian or gender non-conforming woman, would be considered to be a cis woman. They'd all be considered to be trans. Words are supposed to have descriptive power. They're supposed to be useful in communication. This is not a useful concept, and it's not a useful word. So, and I digressed a little bit there, but yeah, so that's just a little bit of the tip of the iceberg, of my, journey towards desisting and dropping the trans label. Yeah. But that's ultimately what happened. So I started covering the Jessica and Eve situation because, as pretty much everyone knows, there weren't that many lefties, and particularly trans advocates and LGBT people who were commenting on it, because for obvious reasons. Like, Yaniv is a very inconvenient case. Cases like Yaniv's, they're a problem. They're a problem on this side of the fence. And so I started commenting on that, but at the same time I also decided that I wasn't going to use a trans label anymore. So I obviously announced that on the Sapphic Sims page. And it was frustrating because I was kind of damned if I did and damned if I didn't, because, I was criticized for that as well. When, I feel like I was just trying to be honest, since everyone's obsessed with...
especially mad that it happened at the same time.
Yeah, which was really, really inconvenient, because it came across almost, I guess, like I was jumping ship altogether. Like, there's this one bad trans person, therefore I'm going to have to stop being trans or whatever. It is what it is. This just happened to happen around the same time. That's not why it happened or anything. But the questions that Yaniv's case raised definitely would have played a part in that, one way or another. Like, questions of, how meaningful is the trans label? How meaningful is it when we're operating according to a system of self-identification rather than any meaningful transition? Those questions would have been raised anyway. But yeah, it was something like 2 days after that where I posted, after I'd come out and said, I'm not trans, where I posted about a video that Yaniv had made of him in a pool, filming himself, as well as other people, and there were children around as well.
Yep.
And I provided a transcript of the video and some commentary as well, and I referred to Yaniv as he for the first time, because up until that point I'd used gender neutral pronouns. But at this point I was like, this is a man. This is a man. And I just,
Yep.
this is not what's important here. And also, I think that when someone is clearly a man assuming trans identity to their own benefit in order to, prey on others, that we should say that,
Yeah, we see him lying about so many things. We need to call that out. And from the pro-trans side, like, we all sit fairly in the middle. I guess you could call us centrists, kind of, from what we stereotypically assume to be both sides. But yeah, I totally forgot what I was saying.
Well, it was just, to me, it's very important, it didn't seem like a controversial thing to me. The idea that, first of all, if you've ever met men, like if you've ever lived on the same planet as men, the idea that men wouldn't call themselves trans when they're not, in order to further their own agenda, is frankly delusional.
Yeah, we talk all the time about.
Oh, you're cutting out there, Kaylee.
She's not actually.
Sorry. Am I here?
Yeah, you're here.
Okay. We talk all the time. It is normal for women to talk about how men will do and say absolutely anything.
Yep.
To get laid.
Oh.
That's normal. That is a trope to the point where it's normalized and children know this.
Yes.
You really think a man isn't going to get a cheap wig and some lipstick and prey on people? Like
Yaniv clearly is. You can't literally not know. Like, he fucking said that he has both parts and they're both circumcised.
Yeah. I know. I mean, he's full of, like,
this is a man, y'all.
He's lied repeatedly. What side you're on. Well, we all agree on this thing. The argument that essentially, I mean, we should, but yet here we are, right?
That's why you posted it, because you posted it thinking you wouldn't get canceled for it. You made the same mistake I made, and that you overestimated.
Well, look, to be totally honest, I did have a sense that there might be some people who objected to, me using male pronouns for Yaniv, but at the same time, it blew up to a degree that I really never could have actually anticipated. And the problem was that it got my back up. It pissed me off a lot because, first of all, I had to watch that video, Yaniv's video, repeatedly in order to get the transcript, and exposing myself to that awful human being over and over again. And also as someone who has been through, child sex abuse and, then later on in life as well, lots of experience with predators and everything, it doesn't really, doesn't feel great to have to expose yourself to that person. But I had been doing it, so I wasn't exactly in a very charitable place in regards to people like Yaniv, and especially in regards to anyone that I perceived as defending Yaniv. So the argument seemed to be that it's never acceptable to question anyone's identity, or anyone's trans identity specifically, even if, they did it at a certain point. Some people started admitting that, there are going to be people who pretend, but even in that situation, it's still not justified because it casts aspersions basically on everyone else's trans identity.
And we are talking about a person who, dressed as a man, went into a women's restroom full of middle school age girls and took selfies in the mirror with them.
Yep.
In the background.
And all I can hear is a complete lack of regard for the safety of the exact people that Yaniv targets. Because who does Yaniv target? Yaniv does not target trans women. Yaniv targets females. Yaniv can tell who is female and who is male when he's figuring out who to sexually harass online. All right? And interestingly, they're all female. And Yaniv, there's no confusion in his mind about who the males and who the females are. And this idea that, we need to shut up and we need to stick with the program and we need to, we need to comply with this person's lies, because, to me it's extremely obvious that that's what he's doing. So that nobody else ever has to suffer having their identity questioned. I mean, we're talking about the safety of children here. Like, I don't know what planet these people are living on, but that was a really revealing moment for me. That thread, I think that post blew up to like over 500 comments or something. And I, at no point, had any doubts that I was on the right side of the fence on that one, and I still do not at all. And that was pretty much the pivotal moment for me, was realizing where the priorities of this community lay, and they're not in a good place at all. Those are bad priorities.
Yeah, their priorities are protecting males.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's where and the funny thing is that the community, there are a couple of things that happen here. The community basically, pretty much alienates its own supporters in a sense. And it's funny, we saw that Vox article just this week talking about the rise of TERFs. When actually what
I read it last night. It was so bad.
Yeah, what that should be better read at is that the movement is doing a better job than ever of alienating the shit out of its supporters, and its female supporters in particular, because of how goddamn sexist this movement is. That's what's actually happening. And the reason why is, first of all, the people involved in the online community have no sense of proportion whatsoever. There's no thought put into the language that's being used here. Comparing words to literal violence and calling people TERFs for merely questioning, some of the most innocuous parts of the ideology. When someone actually does do something that's malicious or hostile or even outright hateful, like, what language have you even got left to refer to that when you've used it all to refer to things that are fairly benign by comparison? And, especially when we're talking about the fact that female people are actually a distinct class of people. They are an oppressed class of people. We face a massive variety of violence that, is targeted towards us, and that's on the basis of our biology, not our identity. And so, comparing words to literal violence sits really, really bad in the, on the minds of a lot of female people.
When you're on the end of experiencing the actual violence.
Yeah, and that's how we sort of end up in this position, because all I keep hearing now, it all just comes across as just like a complete disregard for the well-being of anyone born with a vagina. When you strip away the language, you strip away all of the gender terminology and everything, and you strip away the pronouns, what fundamentally is happening is you have everything geared towards benefiting people born with penises, and at the expense of people born at the cost of people born with vaginas and their well-being. And this can be seen when it comes to the Yaniv debacle, where Yaniv very clearly only targets people born with vaginas, right? And we're supposed to just shut up and take it, and we're seen as like the kind of collateral damage in a sense. This is the price you pay for good gender politics. You're going to have to sacrifice some female children and adults along the way. That's nothing. Which is, that's not a good atmosphere to build allyships, really, with people who have a stake in that. And then even just in the way that the inter-community discourse actually works, whose voice is given priority on which subjects. We see huge double standards. The way that, the so-called genital preference discourse is targeted primarily at people born with vaginas, very rarely at the people born with penises. I wonder why. Spoiler, it's sexism. and the fact that the community refuses to acknowledge that this is in fact sexism. So this is something that is really alienating people, and it should alienate people, because that ultimately is really harmful to us. Like, why on earth should we have to sit around and tolerate sexism? Why should we have to tolerate the idea that we should just be willing to suffer abuse for the sake of making sure no one's identity is invalidated? That's ridiculous. That's not a reasonable thing to ask of anyone. And then
I think the whole point is we're supposed to be raising our female children, raising our girls to not take that kind of abuse. Don't we literally talk about that?
Yeah.
But
Well,
you're out here asking the adults on this side of the aisle to just sit down and take it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we used to. This is something that seemed to happen really quickly. It was not like this even 5 years ago. We were all on the same page about the phenomena of male violence. Talking about male violence almost within the last year or two, that recently has become really difficult, because the movement likes to really do a bit of a bait and switch, where it doesn't believe biological sex is real until it does, and then it doesn't again. Yep. And how on earth you're supposed to tackle the phenomena of male violence if you don't believe that males are actually a coherent class of people? And now, if that class of people, if we're going by gender rather than biological sex, well, that skews all of our statistics, because we know that trans men do not pose the risk to people born with vaginas, otherwise known as females, as people born with penises. Like, we know that. So, it makes it impossible to tackle the issue. And when people brush this off as being unimportant, what you're essentially saying is, fuck women. That's what you're saying. And that's why you're going to repeatedly alienate women and other people, other biologically female people who identify as trans as well. There's a reason why you'll find a lot of them, there's us before I stopped identifying as trans, I guess. There's a reason for that, and it's because we are a cohesive class of people, and we are systemically oppressed on the basis of our biology, and we know that. And we know that we'll continue to be, even if we, wrap it in fancy new woke packaging, even if we switch to using, the language of gender, we will continue to experience the same violence, except we won't actually have accurate language to refer to it anymore, which makes the situation so much worse.
Yes.
So that was a deal breaker for me. That was pretty much the end of it.
Yeah, you're taking away the ability to talk about people's oppression. And it's not like we're just talking about a small oppressed group. We're talking about literally half fucking planet.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand, like, first of all, like, this is callous, but I don't understand how we can prioritize the tiny fraction that is transsexual people.
Well, I mean, ironically, the whole
non-conforming, like, over half of the population that is actively oppressed in a visible way every day.
Yeah, well, ironically, the reason why this is possible is precisely because of that oppression. It's because of sexism. It's because, violence against women and, biologically female people is just seen as an inevitability. It's seen as just like a normal part of everyday life. And this is why, despite the fact that you have literally thousands of women around the world every day and biologically female children and babies being abused and raped and murdered and trafficked, that stuff is just seen as par for the course. You can literally, anyone listening right now, if you Google women killed in 2019, the first 3 articles that you're going to come across are articles about trans women killed in 2019. Now, the loss of any life is a tragedy. And trans women, I don't want to see trans women killed either, actually. And interestingly, you'll find that the main cause of that is men. So it's no use blaming feminists for that.
Wait, it's not these evil rad femmes?
I know. I mean, that's also not new either.
Murdering trans sex workers in the street?
Yeah, I mean, that's
yeah.
also not new, is it? Like, blaming women for what men do is not a new phenomenon at all. And then, the fact that the majority of trans women who are murdered worldwide in any given year, the majority of them are, in fact, in prostitution, not sex work broadly, but very specifically in prostitution. And all people involved in prostitution, almost all of which are female people, are at massively increased risk of all kinds of abuse and violence and, ultimately murder as well. And that's another thing that the left doesn't particularly wish to address in any meaningful way either. So they want to blame biologically female people, and specifically feminists, for violence against trans women, which is enacted by men and most of the time in the context of prostitution. But they don't want to do anything about the male violence or prostitution. So that just looks like the same old sexist bullshit in woke new packaging, and I'm thoroughly done with it. And so then what happened was, obviously, I got cancelled over that post. I've derailed again. I'll keep it fairly brief, but I got cancelled over that post. Everyone decided I wasn't called a TERF. To be fair, I was not labelled a TERF at that point. I was labelled a trans misogynist, which brings us to the next chapter in the story.
With my introduction posts.
Yes, so I was labelled a trans misogynist. I decided that I just wasn't willing to bend the knee to these people on this subject, because I didn't feel like I was wrong. And I added Kaylee here as an admin on my page because I felt like we could use her input. Since everyone wanted to deny her a platform, I thought I'd give her a platform. And I gave her free reign. And take it away, Kaylee.
And Aaron and I had been talking a lot before that, just purely coincidentally, about what trans misogyny really even is. And
Left Book says it is the intersection of transphobia and misogyny.
Who is capable of experiencing the intersection of misogyny and transphobia? Well, if I am being subjected to transphobia, they are seeing me as a man. So I obviously am not also being subjected to misogyny because I'm being treated as a man in a dress. Now, when Aaron would experience transphobia for being a gender non-conforming female, and at the same time, that would likely incorporate misogyny.
Yeah, I do think we need to remember to say that we haven't quite figured out all of this language yet. We're still kind of struggling with getting over left book language. So some of what was said there, like as far as calling it transphobia for somebody to view Kaylee in a certain way, what we actually believe here is difficult to communicate because of this weird split between sex and gender. So some of this is going to sound really clunky, I feel like. And Nix, if you can think of a better way to...
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I see it as you're engaging on left book terms. So in I guess the eyes of trans activists and, the broader left, anyone who were to see Kaylee as being a man or male would be transphobic. It would be transphobic to see you as a male.
Yes.
Yeah. So just working off that assumption.
Yes. Yeah, that's not an assumption I really like to assert at this point in time, especially. But that's a whole nother episode, I feel like.
Well, but it should be noted that nobody here is operating under the delusion that Kaylee is female.
No, we're very clear.
No,
None of us.
I am absolutely male. Otherwise, I wouldn't take cross-sex hormones.
Yes.
They wouldn't be cross-sex hormones, would they?
Yeah. So I was made a mod, and I decided to make a nice, friendly, cheerful, incredibly inflammatory and antagonistic intro post. Which really just set the world on fire because I decided to very nicely tell everybody with entirely too much sarcasm that they're being a bunch of whiny little piss babies. That feminism is supposed to center female people, which, whoo
Yep.
when your audience doesn't really understand the difference between the sexes somehow, that gets really weird and sticky, and the argument's incredibly incoherent.
It's so hard when they're like, but it does center female.
Yeah,
Look
I
at
know,
Eve.
right? So I make this post and assert that trans misogyny isn't real and that trans masculine people would be, by all reasonable uses of these words, that they use, the people who could be targeted by trans misogyny. Um, Nobody liked that.
No, that didn't go over well, really, at all.
Um, so oh goodness, I was subjected to a week of nonstop violent abuse.
Well, and it should be noted that during that week, Loathsome Lesbians was put back up. I republished it because I was hoping that
He was
I
being
could
chivalrous
help.
and trying to draw fire.
Yeah, I mean, I was ultimately I saw what Nyx was trying to do, and I thought Nyx had a chance. Like, I was too far gone. I'd been completely canceled because people knew who I was personally and didn't like me personally at that point. I'd said some things from my personal account that were just over the line for them. So I republished, and I made a very inflammatory post just a couple days later in order
You
to
did. That was very inflammatory.
distract. Yeah, so that week of abuse that she mentioned spanned multiple posts, but they went back and forth
There were
between
dozens
both.
of reviews
Oh
being
yeah.
left by
Yeah.
people that got banned from the page for hurling abuse because, when reviews are enabled, you can leave reviews no matter what.
Well, and let's see,
Yeah.
you got called a man.
I got
I
called a
got
man
called a
repeatedly.
man. Nyx
Aaron,
got
Oh,
called a man.
that was just the worst
Um,
irony of it, wasn't it? Was that it was unacceptable to misgender this
Yes.
friggin' predator. Simultaneously,
This
people were
pedophile.
misgendering
Yes,
us.
pedophile.
Yeah, pedophile. Like,
This-
Pedophile.
don't misgender the
We literally
pedophile.
view. Yeah.
And
How are pedophiles higher on the totem pole than any of us?
Yeah, I
You've
know.
got your priorities fucked up.
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. Geez, where was I? Oh,
The
yeah.
abuse.
The abuse. A real fun one was the insistence that I'm only doing this and helping Unix in all of this, being that I have a thing for you and I'm just trying to fuck you. And
That's right. You
all
and
of this, and it's so laughable.
Which you have to remember that people who are accusing us of this also know me and know who I am, and frequently I'd even be in these conversations.
Yeah.
Like, I straight up told someone to stop trying to pimp my wife out, and he still continued to insist. Like, they literally just walk into this like bull in a china shop and just start
Yelling incoherently.
Yeah, they just attach onto the first thing they think of, whether it's calling me a man, insisting that Kaylee wants to sleep with Nyx. Well, they did the same shit to Auntie too.
yeah,
telling
like virtually
Auntie
all of my
that-
mods got accused of wanting to sleep with me. It was quite funny.
Yeah, yeah, like
I don't think
everything
all
is
of us do either, so.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so it's really
Oh, we have a comment from the peanut gallery.
Yep. So Chansey says that's hilarious because it's just proving that they think trans women only do things to fuck people. Very telling. It is, Chansey, isn't it? It is.
It really dinks you dink, don't it?
Now, a thing that has continually occurred to me is that I don't think that lefties and that, you know, these queer theorists and trans activists themselves actually even see trans women as women. Because if they did, in fact, see trans women as women, they would be telling them to sit down and shut the fuck up. They would be treating them the way that they treat people who are born with vaginas, and they don't treat them that way, with the exception of when those trans women do what Kaylee did and stray off of the beaten path of rhetoric. Then they started treating Kaylee the way that they treat female people. Ironically enough, the one time that they will treat a trans woman the way they treat any other woman is when that trans woman is being inconvenient, and then all manner of misogynistic abuse gets hurled at them. The irony was too much.
Yeah, that was so wild.
Yeah, it was great. So she was a self-loathing trans woman to them, and I was a self-loathing trans man.
Yeah.
Not sure what you were, Nick.
Oh no,
Nick
I was
is
a villain.
The evil turf ringleader.
That's what I was. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's
true. I was
when
like,
it really should be noted that like me getting really critical of trans women is and like angry and loudly in our private conversations led to you questioning more of like the gender ideology and religion.
absolutely. Like, just for the record,
forced on you.
I was turfed by a trans woman. Okay, that's what happened.
If anybody orchestrated this, it was Kaylee.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is like a trans woman who thinks this way is especially dangerous to the ideology, because what happens is when the movement really relies on that female socialization, that desire to be a good person, that desire not to upset anyone, or, and that desire to keep people comfortable and everything, and how easy it is to make us feel guilty. Like, we get emotionally blackmailed a lot. And when you have, the troubles that trans women face leveraged against you, you think, oh my God, I want to be a good person. I don't, I have compassion for this group of people, and I don't want to be a part of that. I want to do everything I can to not be a part of that. So when you do start having those doubts in your mind about, the practices within the movement or the rhetoric, you really squish it down and you go, oh, that's just my transphobia. I got to work harder at not being transphobic. So you really come to a place where you're terminating your own thoughts. So then when you strike up a friendship with someone like Kaylee, who kind of gives you permission to follow those thoughts a little bit further, and, soothes your guilt just a little bit, because, she's a trans woman. Of course, like, she can't hate trans women, can she? So maybe I am allowed to think about this. And then, fast forward a couple of months and here I am, I'm a full-blown gender heretic, right? But no, I really was seen as being like the villain, and all kinds of just, it was bizarre. It was almost like there were conspiracy theories about me, the idea that I had, that I'd orchestrated all this from the beginning, that this was why I made Sapphic Sims, and that I'd been a crypto turf all along, and that I had lied to people about being black, because for some reason, because there are black Sims on my page frequently, people saw that and thought that I must be black, and it sort of sounds like maybe they're the racist ones, but okay. And, accusing
why else
me...
would you ever show the world black people unless you were?
Yeah, I mean, why would I showcase, black Sims content unless I was black? That's crazy. White people never do that. That's just bizarre. And then also, like, being accused of lying about having been through child sex abuse as well. Like, I was... That even made some of my critics uncomfortable as well. I'll give them that, because that was taking it to a ridiculous point. Just basically, once I had been exposed as being this trans misogynist, basically everything about me, everything I'd ever said about myself was a lie. And it was all part of some grand... vicious plot to do some form of violence against trans women.
Yep.
Yeah, and like I'm still waiting for some somebody to give me a reasonable explanation as to how not acknowledging my reality is violent. If I were to be talking to somebody who can't refer to me as a woman, as long as they weren't being deliberately antagonistic and making it clear that, like, really this conversation shouldn't be happening and it's going to be best for everybody involved if we just stop, and that's okay. Like, it's not my dysphoria isn't everybody else's fucking problem.
Your dysphoria is not even my problem, and I'm married to you.
Yep.
Oh, that's so abusive, Aaron. Oh my god.
Oh, that was a great one. All the accusations of being abusive, y'all. Really,
Yeah.
that's so shitty. It's like we don't take things real life. Like let's not straight up be like your relationship is abusive and you are clearly manipulative. First of all, I'm a fucking lesbian. Why would I want
I
to
had
marry a trans woman just for the purpose of keeping her hostage? And like, it's not like this is some weird open relationship, and y'all know this. We are in a monogamous, closed marriage. Effectively, our boundaries aren't what normal, stereotypical straight people boundaries are, but this is
yeah, everybody on earth seen my
the
titties,
only
but
way that they can fathom doing this is like they can't imagine that we could be anything other than in this weird abusive relationship that goes one way or the other, however it is, and that's really ridiculous. I want to tell anybody who thought that and is here that actually makes me really sad for you.
yeah.
Like, I'm sorry that you think that that's a thing that either one of us would do.
And like we're at a point where we quit engaging in kink months ago because of conflicted feelings about how that is actually us self-harming
Via the other person. Like,
via the other person.
a
Like,
relationship is a real relationship that is based in, like, all of these things we talk about are turf ideas. All these things you're accusing us of, like, these are things that have actually, either the realization of them has made our marriage and our relationship stronger, or as our marriage and our relationship has gotten stronger, it's allowed us to see things in a different light. Like, all of this comes from the fact that we're together. It's not the other way around. If we weren't together, we wouldn't be at the points that we're at. And everybody out here is assuming that we're only where we're at because it's impossible to be at this point unless I am some sociopath that's just over here. I'm sorry, but there better be some big turf bucks somewhere, and I better get paid for this if that's what it is, because this is a 24/7 job.
Where's
I
my
pay for
where
this
is
bitch's
my
transition.
where
I
is my
am not
check
out
from
here.
J.K. Rowling?
Yes.
But like that's I think that it's
what are
also
you talking about? It's a check from Mike Pence.
No, Ben
Um,
Shapiro. Ben Shapiro. Where are my Ben Shapiro bucks, baby?
Will they all just cut me checks, please, if you're listening? Like,
No,
I don't charge much. A couple thousand be great.
I
Yeah,
think
honestly, and my opinions can be bought. Any sponsorship opportunities that may present themselves.
I think that it's largely to do with the internet first and foremost, and the way that it's easy to misread tone and also like really blow things out of proportion on the internet. But it's also the nature of the movement itself, and it's almost like there's a sort of mass hysteria going on in the movement because this kind of happened to me in the aftermath of, you know, my cancellation and everything. It was like every single thing that I did online was seen as being like, you know, deliberately malicious or something. It was like me
Yes.
just existing and making just the usual comments that I usually did were seen as being like, another move in this like master plan or something.
You could say I have dysphoria and it's you out here being intentionally malicious.
Yeah, and then to the point, I mean, look, I'm not going to lie, surrounding that Yaniv stuff, I mean,
You
that I'm
could upload Sims content and it could be perceived as malicious somehow.
well, that's
Like,
ultimately,
come on.
that is actually what
Courtney's
happened.
baby.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, I mean, I said it was a girl. Oh my god. But that is ultimately what actually ended up happening. Was of course that big blow up happened, and I was like, well, I mean, this is where I stand on it, and like my views haven't changed. Like I get that people are upset and everything, but we simply don't agree on this. So whatever, you can stay or you can go. And then we just continued business as usual with the page. But then it was like a day or two later that people started commenting going, I think there's some stuff that needs to be addressed. And I'm over here going, I have addressed it. I've told you what I think. What I think has not changed. Like, you can stick around or you can go. And people were really sort of expecting me to respond to the public berating that I'd received, because it usually works, right? And it's a good time to also point out how closely this mirrors the cult tactics. Like this was almost like going through the process of being excommunicated from like a cult, basically.
Yeah.
You have this really intense, really angry berating that happens, and then if that doesn't work, then you move on to guilt. And when that doesn't work, then you excommunicate. And once I was excommunicated, they moved on to anyone who had any affiliation with me. So people on my mod team and other page admins that hadn't made a stance on the Sapphic Sims debacle were, basically demands were made of them to draw a line, pick a side, and that's pretty much what happens with cults, and it's just bizarre to me that no one could see that. But then the hysteria went to the point where I had a run-in with someone in another group who had been a part of that, and I'd been in a group chat with that person months before, and I didn't remember anything about that person. And at this point I was so done. Like I actually did get kind of short with people just because I was so over it. I was frustrated for obvious reasons. And this person, I had forgotten their name, and they got really upset with me because I'd forgotten their name. Next thing I know, I'm being sent screenshots of them referring to me by my birth name, because they know my birth name, and accusing me of misgendering them, of like deliberately misnaming them. And I'm sitting here going, I didn't remember a damn thing about you. Like, I don't.
There is more irony.
Yeah, I know. I know. I don't. It's weird. Like, I'm not. People like to say I'm online, but I'm not so online that I would remember details like that about a random stranger on the internet that I was in a group chat with a couple of months before. But the fact that I didn't remember this stuff,
bizarre.
It was just interpreted as like all being deliberate. Like, obviously I knew that stuff and I was deliberately using a wrong name. I was deliberately misgendering them. It was just like, there's nothing that you can do right. Once you have had the label TERF put on you, then that's it. Everything you do is now malicious and evil and violent, and all of this stuff, and you're a safety risk to everyone. It's just it really is hysterical.
We need to, this is a little bit of a segue, but in one of the groups that I plugged this in, we had somebody ask, and we need to make it clear that this Nyx is not the famous left book Nyx Gray.
No, I'm not Nyx Gray.
And we are trying not to name anybody, but people in left book know who we're talking about here. This is just unrelated. This is not about Nyx Gray.
No.
Those of you who have said that it is, and don't start that rumor again. Nyx Gray wants nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
We haven't spoken to that Nyx about this at all, but we do know that Nyx wants nothing to do with what's going on here. So please don't start that again. That's really rude.
Yeah, we're definitely not the same person. I don't think we even live in the same country.
Leave them.
No, you don't. You are opposite time zones.
Ah. Yeah. Not the same
Nyx
person.
is over here with us. not over there with you.
Yeah, and like the reason why no one can figure out who I am, people like going around trying to figure out who I am, is literally because I was not involved in this part of the online community until I made my page. You're not going to find me anywhere else because I haven't been anywhere else. Like, I'm just Sapphic Sims. I don't run anything else except obviously now the new Gender Heretics page. And I don't have any other presence anywhere. So, not the same person, not even a particularly important person. Calm down.
Yeah.
I think you're important.
Oh, thank you.
Uh-oh. It's more evidence for their theories about me being madly in love with you.
Yep, everyone's in love with me. Totally. Well, I guess the culmination of that, the next most dramatic thing that happened, because things have died down now, actually, but the next dramatic thing that happened after that, the comic that you posted on Loathsome Lesbians, that very inflammatory post, which, look, I gotta say, like, I was not a fan of. I do understand why you did it, and now this also, good segue. One of the reasons why I don't consider that to be a deal breaker is because of what I found out about the things that we've kind of been led to believe about violence against trans people, and specifically trans women. And so a lot of the stuff that is said in the community, a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the, pick a side and the hard lines and all of that, it's all predicated on the idea that trans women are being, murdered and abused at these astronomical rates. And it's often referred to as like a trans murder epidemic. And
it's frequently referred to as a genocide, which is it's appalling.
Yeah, that's
how dare they? But
yeah, so it's definitely
I need to not rant about that.
Well, yeah, I think even a lot of trans activists would also agree that genocide is an inappropriate word for it. But I've heard that as well, and it's disgusting. It would be disgusting to refer to, murder of female people as a genocide, I think. But so a lot of that stuff is predicated on this idea, and this is why, when you make a misstep in the community, it becomes very easy to emotionally blackmail you. So, you might have just said something wrong, or you might have not understood something, and next thing you know, you're being told that what you just did or what you just said is somehow, enabling this horrible prevalence of violence against trans women, that you're helping to perpetuate violence against trans women, that you're essentially complicit in causing trans women to be murdered and abused. And, we all want to be good people. No one wants to be complicit in systemic oppression. Well, no one really wants to. On the surface, obviously, when it comes to actual systems of oppression, disengaging from them and dismantling them is, a bit more complicated than just saying the right things. But yeah, most of us, we don't want to be complicit in that stuff. And when you say that this group of people is being horribly persecuted, violently persecuted, being murdered at massive rates, of course we all want to do something about that. And, there have been times in the past where I've been talking about issues that, in my mind, were very specific to female people, and I've copped massive backlash by people who insist that me thinking that these, or framing these as being female issues, was, perpetuating violence against trans women. And even the things that I didn't understand, of course, I'm sitting there going, well, I must be doing, I must have done something really bad. I must be doing something really harmful to this group of people. And, I want to trust people when they tell me what their needs are. So, I'm just going to do my best to adjust and change and all of this stuff. But then I thought, well, I'm going to go have a look into the reality of violence against trans people and the reality of the trans murder epidemic. And that's exactly what I did. And what I found out was that in the United States and in Australia and in the UK, trans women are some of the least likely people to be murdered. And among trans people, trans women, they have the lowest rates of sexual assault. Of course, any sexual assault is horrific, but what the point of me saying this stuff, and I ultimately made a post about this to actually clarify this, and I was quite angry as well when I made the post. Like, I felt like I'd been lied to, because for all intents and purposes we have. You know, we've been led to believe that this is this massive, massive issue that is so big that it means that violence against women in terms of biologically female people somehow pales in comparison. And it turns out that that's not the case. And that's been leveraged against us for a really long time, politically and interpersonally, in order to get us to shut up and in order to get us to accept things that don't make sense to us. You know, so of course, like, I was quite angry about it. So I made a post with all of these numbers, you know, and there was pretty nasty backlash against that as well, even though I had cited these sources. And the response was largely people really shifting gears, you know, like the same kind of people who would have insisted that, you know, there was a trans murder epidemic were suddenly going, oh, we never said that there were that trans women were more likely to be murdered than female people. We never said that. Well, yeah, you did. The whole movement's been saying that for about a decade now. I don't think you can deny that.
I wish that we could rebut mirror the posts they make all the time about 47 trans women this year have been murdered.
Well,
and
this
you
year,
know, like, how many female people have been murdered so far this year? And like, we can't even make a post like that because nobody keeps track.
Yeah, well, I mean, just for in Australia they do, and just for some context, since 2014, I believe, 2 trans women have been murdered in this country, and in this year alone, 43 women. Now, that the word women is being used in terms of reference to sex in that regard. They're all biologically female women. So, I mean, one of the things that was said, one of the objections.
Crazy though. 43 doesn't seem like very many coming from someone who lives in the United States.
Yeah, it doesn't, because when you
think
look
about
at
our numbers.
Yeah,
Jesus
well,
Christ.
17.
That's like this week.
17 trans women murdered in the United States this year so far, I believe. With
how about we keep track of how many prostituted people, how many prostituted female people are murdered each year, and compare that to the number of trans women murdered, and tell everybody to shut the fuck up about it already.
Yeah, I mean, the point of these conversations, it's not to minimize, you know, the seriousness of those murders by any means at all. Like, it is tragic. It is a problem. It's mostly gun violence in the United States, and they're mostly trans women of color as well. And there are some good reasons for trans women of color ending up in circumstances where they're getting murdered, that have to do with institutional racism. And, you know, those are very serious things.
Homophobia.
And homophobia. Yes. So the reason why we talk about this is not to minimize that, but it's to sort of highlight the hypocrisy as well, that, you know, nobody is demanding that people pick a side over sexism that perpetuates violence against biologically female people. You know, that leads to people justifying us being trafficked and, you know, being abused and murdered and bought and sold and that sort of thing. Nobody sees anything, you know, when people use misogynistic language in LGBT spaces, nobody sees that as being complicit in, you know, institutional violence against women. And it's certainly not even like female people, because they don't even regard us as being a coherent class of people in the first place. So it's extremely hypocritical, and I think that it takes quite a lot of audacity to demand that I sit down and shut up about issues that affect biologically female people when we're being murdered in the thousands, because 17 trans women have been murdered in the United States. You know, and especially when we're talking white trans women, there is a reason why the community constantly leverages hypothetical trans women of color and black trans women in particular in these conversations. It's because there are very few of them around in the online community to actually speak for themselves, and there is a reason for that. it's the majority of the trans women in the community whose voices are being elevated. They are fairly privileged white trans women, and they are honestly the demographic that is at the least risk. And it's very frustrating to have those voices being elevated and having those very same people leveraging the lives of hypothetical black trans women in order to get other biologically female people to shut up. Like,
Yep.
this is... the movement ends up looking a lot like men's rights activism, to be blunt.
Maybe it is.
Well,
Who knows?
I mean, there are obviously very real issues that trans people and trans women specifically face, but I don't think this movement is actually doing anything to address them. This movement seems to be focused on browbeating.
Yeah, if you're ignoring the very real problem, if you're going to care about both things, you have to figure out how you can balance those things. And if you care about the rights of female people and the realities of sex-based oppression, then you need to figure out how to balance trans rights with that. And if the way you balance your trans rights with that is to say, well, nobody anywhere is allowed to have sex-segregated spaces that are not open to people who are not born female. And by the way, it's okay to have spaces that are not open to people who are not born male. Then that is not feminism, because you have now said that you don't care that women are oppressed on the basis of sex.
Well, I mean,
female.
they actively deny that that's even real, so I just don't know how they can even call their brand of feminism, because it actively denies that female people are even exist as a material biological
Quite frankly,
reality.
are even female. They are telling us that we are not even female. We may be female, we may not be female, but that depends on what our identity is. And poor confused me, just I don't know that I'm actually a man yet. And that's why they're trying to tell me that. But like that's really what they're saying to us.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the ridiculousness of, the things that were being said to me when I was getting cancelled was, people, because I had said that I wasn't trans, people going on about me being cis and asking me what made me think that, my opinions on trans politics mattered at all and all of that. And it was so bizarre because I was still a dysphoric person. And I absolutely... The idea was that because I didn't identify as trans, that I must then identify as a woman. I don't identify as a woman, and I don't identify as female. I don't identify as anything. I don't have a gender identity. My body, my reproductive sex, is what is referred to in the English language as female, as a descriptor. It is not prescriptive. It is descriptive.
Does anyone here identify as human?
I don't identify as human either, and yet somehow I actually am, and that has some material consequences, really, like that are undeniable. So it was.
I feel like you're saying the world is actually real and not like an inconvenience outside.
What I'm saying
outside of your life in the internet.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that reality is a turf. All right. Reality is a turf. But yeah, there's not a lot of material analysis in any of this stuff at all. And then further, obviously, I didn't have most of the views that I've developed now in the wake of this. This happened afterwards. Once I'd had that big shock, of separation from the community and its rhetoric and got some distance from it, was able to really wind things back and go back to square one and actually critically examine the things that I'd been subscribing to for the last decade of my life.
And that's about when we started having the talks that led to us deciding to start the podcast.
Yeah. And that was also, listening to other people talk about stuff that, it's not permitted to talk about in the community, and we've had some pretty good conversations, and we figured that other people might be interested in hearing them as well. And might raise some
Yeah, and these
questions.
things can't be done via text because, as you already said, people are reading in to what we're saying, all kinds of interpretations.
It's a lot harder to add subtext to somebody's voice, I feel like.
Yeah,
And
You can't overanalyze it. You can't read it 4 times and figure out what they actually meant.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, moving forward with, this first episode was pretty much just about us, providing some context for what had actually
don't
happened, because this pretty much opened up a really big divide in the community. This kind of echoed throughout Left Book what happened here.
Yep.
There were a lot of different pages involved, and um, there was a bit of a new
I think I'm on
faction.
like at least 100 new block lists.
I would say so.
Um,
Only 100. Oh my god, step it up, Kaylee.
yeah, because
Yeah,
I did all this interaction from my personal account because everybody already knew who I was, and I felt that it would be easier to just immediately be transparent about who I am and not have a pseudo scandal when they were so proud that they figured out that it was me all along.
well, yeah,
Like, I don't want them to have the satisfaction of like the Scooby Doo mask tearing off that they think they'll get.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
Yeah, and
go on.
I think the point here is that these are um these are very real life things for us. Like, this is our life. We actually live as a lesbian and an FTN or MTF transsexual person in a relationship with each other. This is our real life. These politics actually affect our life, especially being in the U.S. with the political climate the way it is. Like, it's very important to us that you see that this is not a game to us. We're not sitting at home in our parents' basement, not going outside, living in the world. We live in the world every day, and there are very real world effects of this rhetoric, and there will be worse effects if trans activists continue to do what they do, because there will be a reaction and a pendulum swing that is fueled by the right. And you can say that we agree with the right all you want, but we absolutely do not. There are very, very different. Like, the right thinks that it's okay in the US that an emergency room can refuse to save Kaylee's life because she is a transsexual. We don't agree with that. And if you keep alienating all of your supporters, who will you have to push back against the very real pendulum swing that is going to be the reaction of the right, especially as we're already dealing with the rise of the right in multiple, really in all of our countries, in the countries that everybody from Left Book is in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
because we're talking about like an English speaking community
Yeah,
that
this isn't a game. This is real life.
yeah, yeah,
And we live it. So to say that we are out here advocating with the right for the government's ability to take away Kaylee's right to housing, to a job, to health care. We are not saying that. We are not saying that we shouldn't be doing things to protect people who are transitioning and people who are dysphoric, no matter how, whether or not they transition medically. Like, we are not advocating against the rights of anyone. We are just not allowing our politics to steamroll female sex-based rights in
yeah.
favor of trans rights.
like how about we just like actually do the thing that all of these lefties everywhere have been shouting about this whole time and abolish gender. Because
Yep.
abolishing gender roles, like, actually benefits everybody in a huge, like, suddenly it becomes okay for a man to be a caregiver and a, stay at home husband and all of these things. Like, these suddenly become okay, and like we can free ourselves of all of this oppressive bullshit on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that people, when the accusation is made that so-called TERFs are in cahoots with the right wing on the subject of gender identity, people really misunderstand this, because the thing is that radical feminists are gender abolitionists. They, when they see someone who looks like Kaylee and doesn't deny their sex, then they say cool. When they see a biologically male person who is gender non-conforming, who likes to wear dresses and makeup and grow their hair long and perform a domestic role in a relationship, they say, hey, that's cool. When a religious conservative sees a gender non-conforming biologically male person, they say, you're disgusting, you are an abomination, you are unnatural, you're a pervert. We're coming from very different directions here. The only objection that so-called TERFs actually have is to the idea that performing femininity is what makes you a woman. And I feel like we don't really have time to get into that. That warrants an episode all of its own,
Yes.
and we're going to be doing that. Like, this was more a get to know
we?
us. Yeah, who are we? How
And
did we become
also
gender
us
heretics?
figuring out how to, like, not be complete bumbling idiots while we're trying to broadcast live.
Yeah, this was a test run, and I don't actually have any guarantees that as soon as we end the stream that this isn't going to fucking disappear or something. So cross your fingers. But it seemed to
I mean,
go
we should
well.
at least leave it for the week.
Yeah, it seemed to go well. So we're gonna.
But this very well could be a limited release.
Yes, it could be. Um, we're going to do a bunch of different things with this going forward. We're going to have lots of, conversations, probably pick a topic. The gender critical position is definitely one that we're going to have to do soon, and also possibly responding to some videos, like some ContraPoints videos, because people just love linking those all over my Facebook page. So we might as well respond to them. And there's a few different people that we're going to be having on, and hopefully that circle will widen as well. It'd be good to have like a variety of voices coming on. Next week we're going to have Anti-Heroin from the Anti-Heroin's Dirty Spellbook Facebook page, which is a fairly new page. She's also been a mod on the Sapphic Sims page for quite a while, and she has some pretty cool things to say.
And hopefully we can bug our friend Chansey.
Yes. So hopefully. And I guess also, if there's anyone else out there who runs a Facebook page and has had some experience with the kind of dramas that we were talking about tonight and would like to maybe put their hand up to come on sometime, just hit us up and maybe something can be organised. Have either of you got anything else to add? I feel like we should wind this down because we're approaching 2 hours now.
Yes, we are.
We are.
Oh goodness,
No, I think
I
we
don't think
covered.
I can like do that.
Chansey says that they'll be joining. Stay tuned.
Okay.
Like, obviously not today.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to
There's
be...
that confirmation.
This is going to be a standing appointment for every Sunday, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. And we might even do some other ones during the week, but there's going to at least be one every Sunday. And if you subscribe and like and click on the little bell if you're watching on YouTube, then you'll get a notification every time we upload a video or every time we go live. So you'll never miss anything.
And if you are a Discord listener, you can just, hang out and we'll tell you.
Yeah.
Well, and if you're on the Discord, you can also communicate with us when we're not live. We do monitor and we are present on the Discord. So if there's things that you maybe would like some elaboration on, especially things we just mentioned in passing, we're all around there, and there are also other people who agree with much of what we're saying on that Discord as well. So there is a
And
lot of potential for conversation there
we
about these
will
ideas.
also be putting all of our sources for statistics and everything up in the Discord in its own section.
Yeah, we have a resources channel where we'll be substantiating claims that we make regarding statistics and things on the stream as well.
Yep.
So that's it for episode 1 of Gender Heretics. And if you enjoyed this, then don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell so that you know when we're live and you can join us again.
Click it.
And to follow the Gender Heretics Facebook page. And we will catch you next week, Sunday, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time.